So my name is Latanya Sweeney. It's great to see some of you I already know. I'm sorry I missed yesterday. I try to get here every year, but I was at another conference in California yesterday. Took the red eye. My bag went on to Boston, so I am here as I am. I have like this is all there is. Whatever I was carrying is the only thing that made it here. So many years ago. I think this is the 7th time this conference has been done. Around the 3rd year of the conference, I made a presentation about this idea of how powerful it could be if we began tracking or trying to figure out where are the places that people's data go. And so this was basically kind of a really simple question. It's a question that had been asked way back in earlier when people were first thinking about HIPAA, what became known as the HIPAA privacy rule. There was a council, a commission put together at the National Research Council, and this is sort of what they documented, and it had a really profound impact at the time because right in the middle of the HIPAA debates, it was like, oh, well, wait a second, we didn't know medical data went here or there. And the fact that it had had that kind of impact, I knew how important it could be to know, to be able to document where the data is sharing. Because one of the biggest problems that we could say today is our data is kind of open, but the actual data sharing is very hidden. Like you don't actually know who has your data. And so what could we learn if we actually did do that? So it was in 2010 that we announced in this conference that we're going to start tracking where all the places that data goes. And this is sort of what it looked like at first. If any of you were here back then, it was pretty fancy. You could drag a mouse around and walk along the lines and stuff like that. And it was pretty kind of a little bit of a bit of a surprise even back then. And then a couple of years ago, we partnered with the University of Texas and had some students work on it through PPR. And in 2013, we started adding breaches, which really started building out a lot of the data sharing information. If you actually visit the website and you click on a node, it'll actually tell you what is the reason. Like it'll give you example companies, and will actually tell you why it is we say that they share that data. What is our evidence of that? So this is what it looks like today, and so you can visit the site and so forth. And so we were interested, one, in continuing to build it out, and Jisoo was the largest contributor to it. I don't know how many of you met her yesterday, but she did a fantastic job in building out thousands of more nodes. Not all of them are visible on this particular slide. But we also spent the year really trying to understand what could we learn from the data map, like the last couple of years, like really, so that we've got this, and if the promise of it is to actually help us get more insight into data sharing, what kind of insight could we get? And so we began kind of walking around and asking ourselves various questions like who are the players and so forth. I'm going to just stop at one place. Each one kind of gave us different insights, but one of them that became a real big hub is the one you see here, which is that center of discharge data. And this was this was what really was prompted by some of the work that you may have seen from Ali and Basenda yesterday. The idea that when we looked at who were the states that were giving out data at that node, these were statewide collections, we found that only 3 of them were giving out the data in a way that would be compliant to HIPAA. Everybody else was doing so at a weaker standard. And so we did a re-identification experiment to show how vulnerable Washington State was. We presented those findings at this conference 2 years ago, or 2 years ago. And that led to Washington State improving its practice. It changed its law. It still made it publicly available data, but that version is not as susceptible. It's much stronger. And then if you needed the more sensitive data, they had an application process. And then this year, students attacked Maine and Vermont. Because one of the things that was really interesting about what happened with the Washington State was there was kind of an expectation that once we had done that experiment, it would kind of be done. But in fact, they were pretty resilient. So I apologize if that's a bit of a repeat from what you learned yesterday. So the other kind of lessons that we went around to learn about were how many of the flows weren't covered by HIPAA. And we were surprised that more than half of them aren't covered by HIPAA. And we began to look at that. HIPAA, the experiment that had sort of really framed the way the HIPAA safe harbor works was a simple re-identification that I had done on William Wells data. But at that time, health data sets were shared like the stuff on the left, linked to demographics to a voter list to be able to re-identify individuals. We could just simply link these two together on zip code, birth date, and gender. And if you do that, then zip code, birth date, and gender is unique roughly in the United States for about 87% of the population. And what this chart shows us is if I move horizontally from date of birth to year of birth, or vertically from a 5-digit zip code to a county, the percentage of people who are unique in the United States dramatically drops. HIPAA put a line at around 0.04%, which was year of birth and the first few digits. And so this had been the standard, and so our question was from the data map was the standard really any good? Sorry, I keep rolling it the wrong way. So one of the things we did over the last year, with a new paper coming out this year, is we were able to really test that. We partnered with a group, Silent Spring, who had, back in 2006, had done a study in Northern California where they had really picked 40 houses randomly and did air and samples and some health demographics. It was an environmental health data set. And the question was, they never shared that data, and they still knew, of course, who the participants were. Could we figure out some number of the participants? So first we anonymized the data where we used year of birth and no zip code and other housing characteristics were in bands of years. And we found that we still could uniquely and correctly identify 20% of the people by name, and 9 or 40 or 23% by address. That's a huge number. That means data compliant to HIPAA, any other data could run the same risk, because what makes this different is in order to do this re-identification, we didn't limit ourselves to the demographics. Instead, we included in their data housing characteristics. But that's the same thing as saying I'm going to link it to prescription data based on diagnosis, or I have a list of people on my website who all have cancer, and now I know something about their cancer, so I'm going to find them in the data. And so there are many parallels to this, which means as soon as I began using these other fields, the percentage of people who can be re-identified at a standard at HIPAA is still really high, 20%. Or 23%, that's a very high number. And I think it's a real shocker and reminds us that this might be a good time for the HIPAA safe harbor to be revisited. Even when we aggregated the year of birth into 10 and 20-year age range, we still were able to re-identify at least one person and one address, which was pretty amazing as well. So there's something fundamentally flawed in today's times with the way the HIPAA safe harbor tries to prescribe. And that kind of finding, we think, will probably resonate pretty loudly at HHS, that maybe it is time to revisit the safe harbor. And so that was one thing that came out of looking at the data map. Let's see. Another thing that came from looking at the data map was this idea that a lot of these flows, when they do, the ones that are covered by HIPAA, a lot of them are through the expert determination standard of HIPAA. That means that, so there are 4 ways you can get data outside of the care of the patient in HIPAA. One of them is the safe harbor. That was the prescription we just saw. All dates are changed to the year, geography is only the first few digits. Another way you could get data out, if you're a hospital or a hospital or a physician or someone who had this data and wanted to share it, like an insurance company, is you could hire someone and they can say the data is sufficiently de-identified. And it's called the expert determination. There's no real standard about what their knowledge needs to be. And how they go about determining it. There's no requirement in the law of what that determination would be. They don't even have to tell us what it is. And so one of the things we found in the data map is a lot of the data sharing that's happening is being done through this expert determination. The question is, how good is the expert determination? So we were sort of beating our head against the wall, unable to make any progress. Because, as I said, you can make the determination that this health data set's fine to share. There have been versions put out online, and they have no requirement to tell us what they did or why they think it's sufficient. And then they'll also add a data use agreement that'll say, and if you re-identify this, we're going to come after you, we're going to threaten you, we're going to do all these things. And the problem with that, it sounds like a good idea to have a do not re-identify anyone, but the problem with the do not re-identify clause in a data use agreement is it doesn't improve the practice, because it doesn't stop the data from being vulnerable, and it doesn't stop data analytic companies and others from exploiting those vulnerabilities. It just stops people who are trying to make it become better from saying it. And so eventually, we had an opportunity in a lawsuit to actually, where a team of leading data privacy practitioners put together 4 protocols to get this data through a lawsuit. And they said, look, these are the protocols we've been using all over the place. So one of them was a clustering approach that had to be where people were, where you couldn't, they sort of used, they called it k-anonymity, but it wasn't, up to 11. Then they had another version where you did that and then you still randomly redacted data. Then they had a third one where it used an enclave. This was under a public records request, so enclaves take on a different notion than we normally think of in research. And the fourth one is you just produce a standardized data set, sort of a statistical database. And we were able to show vulnerabilities in all of them. And the judge ruled on 5 different counts as to why it is they could not possibly release any of this data. And we showed harms and things like that as well as re-identifications. So this paper is also coming out. We're pretty excited about this because it says that we have to change the way we think about the expert determination clause in HIPAA. Like, you know, how do we make that more transparent? How do we build in a mechanism so that it will automatically improve? Right now, there is, for the last 15 years that we've had HIPAA, from those best practice protocols, there's been no improvement. So this is why I think that was a really nice finding. And so as we look around, around the data map, another place that we found interest was here in this online websites and in apps. And so we had done some work looking, this is work that was done at the when I was at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, looking at personal data from the top apps and the domains on the right to where that information goes. And what we became interested with realizing on the data map is that these 2 worlds are now combining. That is, the places that you visit online, your devices, like a Fitbit and so forth, the apps that are tracking you or tracking pregnancy and so forth, are also contributing, are now starting to show up on the data map. And so our question was, how do we then go about sort of pushing that to the next stage? So the work that the new work that we're doing is to take the data map and cross it with a project we call My Data Can. It's very similar to what you heard downstairs just earlier today when they talked about this idea of how do you get data under an individual's control. And so the way it should be available for the public, or at least for a sample of the public this fall. If any of you want to be pilots during the summer, let us know. But basically it allows you to connect your devices through a private VPN at Harvard. And Harvard will make some privacy guarantees about the data that only you'll have access to it. And then you can actually see what information others are capturing about you. And then because it's data that you control, we believe that we'll be able to help develop apps to help you use your data to sort of improve your quality of life as well. So that's sort of what our new thing is. And so hopefully when I come back next year, we can tell you how that's going. So that's sort of an overview of the lessons learned from the data map over this year. Really these big, sort of real big push to try to improve the standards of HIPAA in different ways and different fronts. And then this second piece, which is sort of our launch for next year of sort of integrating My Data Can into the data map. So that gives us, that's sort of the 10,000-foot view. I'm interested in your comments, questions. We can have the rest of the time for discussion. Hi. And you should say your name.
Oh, sure. I'm Rita Torx today, and I work at the intersection of policy and standards and health IT. I was curious about your opinion on how do we balance the need to correctly identify matched patients across the healthcare system and the risks that you're describing with the things with non-HIPAA covered entities and stuff like that. So.
Well, so there are three answers to that question. So one answer is that suppose I come back in a year from now and this is the hottest new thing. This is my DataCam thing. Then in fact your problem's solved, because in fact the ability for my DataCam to become a personal health record is pretty trivial. If people start storing their devices there, then we can actually just add the opportunity to store your health data there. And in some way, the individuals having their own sort of health vault. These models have been around a long time. It could evolve into one of any instantiation of that. And then that allows, if you want the expert version of it, even a certified version of it, meaning a version that the individual could not have altered, you could actually get it through their My Data Can account. So that's one answer. A second answer, though, is the issue of how do I link data so is totally at odds with how do I anonymize data. So you should not be, if you tell me I anonymize this data for sharing publicly, and this is how you link to it, then something's wrong. It's just totally broken. So the standard for anonymization and the standard for the spaces that we could link in, like in a health information exchange. Health information exchanges don't get anonymized data. They get the actual data. And they're having a problem because there's no unique identifier. You know, so Latanya Sweeney.
There are some HIEs who are giving anonymized data. As part of
There are some
research.
HIEs that are giving out. That's different than her question, though. Her question
This
is
was to your statement.
right. So okay. So let me take the third one second then. If an HIE, a health information exchange, who's just grabbing information from physician offices and hospitals and labs, decides to give out an anonymized version, any anonymized version, I don't care where it comes out of the healthcare system, should be subjected to the conversation that I just had about the safe harbor and the expert determination. And if you tell me any of those parties who produce an anonymized data set is that you can link to it, then something's wrong with their anonymization. Okay? Now, if I go inside and I say, how can I make this HIE work better? Right? How do I make it do? Because the problem with the HIEs, so I was on the ONC, the commission out of the stimulus bill that tried, don't blame me for HIEs. I tried really hard to improve the approach. The problem that the HIEs have is they're getting data from all these individuals. How do they know which records are your records? Right? They have lots of other problems too. So the first problem is how do they know it's correct? It's a lot like a credit bureau. But the credit bureau has the advantage of your social security number. So if you want credit or you have a bank account and so forth, you always give your social security number. So the credit bureau says, oh, it's the same Latanya Sweeney because or the same Jane Smith because it's the same social security number. The health insurance, the health information exchanges don't have that advantage. And so then they're trying to figure out, well, how do I make sure it's the same patient? Because if they get it wrong, people can die. You know, you can have an allergic reaction, you go to the hospital, and suppose in fact the allergic reaction, they don't know about it, they just pulled up your data out of the exchange and you're unconscious and they don't know about it and they give you the wrong drug. Or it could be that it says you are allergic and now the drug that would more likely be effective, they can't give you because it's wrong. And either way, these errors could creep in. So they have problems if they're trying to match the records. And so the question is, can we use name matching? Can we use date of birth? You know, there have been several studies done about what's the right kind of string matching to do linking when you're inside of that ecosystem, how you can get improvements. But the fact that it's a black box and has no input from the patient is a real problem. Because at the credit bureau, I can go to the credit bureau and I can say, let me see my credit report. And I have an active interest in cleaning it up. And the health information exchanges are doing this matching on weaker data because they don't even have a Social Security number equivalent. And then there's no patient input.
Well, actually, there's one that PPR has certified is actually meeting all their privacy requirements and engagements on the patients.
Where is this one?
Delaware Health Information.
Which one?
Delaware?
Delaware? I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. I also
We funded a lot of them.
Well, I'm on both boards, so I sort of make sure we have.
Oh, so you made it
I
happen.
make sure we have continuing conversations.
So
on this.
we should put
And
you
in
on the other
fact-
boards.
In fact, Delaware Health Information is going to be our pilot to test your privacy framework work because we want to take that and actually take that into the marketplace and use that as the certification process. So everybody, I think Latanya Sweeney is one of the most wonderful people in the world.
Oh boy, I pay him on a regular basis.
Hi,
Hi.
Melissa Goldstein, I'm with GW.
Hi.
Say the federal government, let's assume they actually decide, it's a big assumption, to actually change both the safe harbor and the expert opinion. How often does it need to be changed? Every 2 months, 3 months, 4 months?
Well, it depends on how they keep breaking it, right? So what? There's something fundamentally wrong with the safe harbor. The idea, if you're going to replace it with another prescription, then you have to kind of there has to be this sort of come to reality moment about what actually is going on here. Do we have to be in this rat race? Can we even be in a rat race about how to redact the data? Should we assume that there is this idea that data gets redacted and it's going to be perfect? Can we just instead assume it's not going to be perfect and we're just going to create a loop by which, oh, wait, now I know that data is vulnerable? Well, that automatically improves the standard. And we have a remedy for the data sets that have already been shared. So I think that kind of rethinking, I'd love to see HIPAA, HHS do thinking at that bigger level. First, can we even get them to think about it?
Dennis Melamed,
Hi.
how are you?
Pretty good.
The question then, building on that notion, what then are the implications of de-identification when it comes to personalized medicine and genomics, where we're getting increasingly granular, that the ability to re-identify seems to be heightened almost exponentially as we get more granular.
Yep.
So what's your sense on that then? Do we need to kind of settle on a percentage ability or risk of re-identification? I mean, there's no reasonable expectation that it will be perfectly de-identified.
So I like your question right after her question. And the reason is because I think the way we've thought about these things in the past are outdated. I don't think they really can, I don't think it's a matter of changing, like when HIPAA first came out, they had this idea, well, if you were going to anonymize, make sure at least it's 5. You know, it can't be less than 5 individuals that record could relate to. Nowadays, it's 11, right? If you try to just change that kind of number, if that's your notion of tweaking, I don't think you're going to succeed. I think we'll just have this conversation another 15 years every year.
It doesn't sound like you like the data use agreements, though, because where I go from there is use limitations, right? And accountability, and you get punished if you do what you're not supposed to do with the data.
Right.
But you don't like, it didn't sound like you liked data use agreements or that thought that they were particularly useful, so.
Right, so we could talk about what my new frameworks look like, and maybe that kind of gets closer to Dennis's question, because let me just throw out some brainstorming ideas. I don't have any religion around them, I'm just sort of throwing these out. So one model that we've seen a lot of is kind of what Washington State did. We see this a lot, where people have different levels of access. So I don't have one de-identified version and it's anonymous and the world can just have it. I have multiple levels and the access requirements increase as you get the more sensitive data. So that kind of model is kind of nice, because then if I find that the public isn't public, I can change the access controls and things like that, so that the effort to get it, so that I do a risk assessment, and the risk assessment on that data set says how sensitive is the data, now we match what it takes to get the data to the risk that the data represents. So that's a model that we've seen a lot. We actually have a paper on it called Data Tags. It's used throughout Harvard, for example, on all of its research data, no matter where it came from. Let me just throw out a couple more models. Another model is that you put out a data set in the public, but it's not anybody gets it. Part of what is in the data use agreement is that you're bound to stop using it once there's a public notice that it's vulnerable. So this is a model based on breach notices. So this is kind of a privacy vulnerability notice. So if a privacy vulnerability notice comes out, that means you have to stop using that version of the data and you're required to now go get the newer data set. This allows us to get better. And why does this allow us to get better? So it used to be, I often liken it to encryption. So many years ago, we didn't have the slightest idea how to encrypt data. But we needed national security secrets, we had financial secrets, we had all kinds of secrets. We had to do our best. So people would come up with, well, let's just do this and this. And so if you looked at the original text and you looked at the encrypted text, they said, that looks good enough, and they would use it. Then people would break it. And then they would say, okay, well, that didn't work, let's do something better. And then people would break that. And this cycle continued until we eventually got to kind of strong encryption that lets us use credit cards online and things like that today. That's what's not happening in data privacy. The data use agreements that say, let's prohibit it. The idea that the public data set has to be the anonymous one. We don't want to hear how it's not anonymous. Makes it impossible for that loop to continue. And so 15 years from now, we'll have the same vulnerabilities, except the cost to the American public grows. Because the more data there is about the American public out there, the more vulnerable we become. And that's been on every front. The more vulnerable we are on identity theft, on taxes, on elections, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, Jerry Schatz, Pellegrino Center, Georgetown. Much of the focus has been on the regulated community and the people who are basically oriented toward compliance or toward coming into compliance when disciplined. Who is looking at the rogues, the off the table data brokers and aggregators, and who is buying this stuff? That to me is a very interesting question, and I wonder how much work is being done on that and by whom.
So a couple of years ago, at this very conference, when we announced the Washington State, it was myself and Jordan Robertson. Jordan Robertson is a reporter for Bloomberg News, and we actually did the Washington State. I did the Washington State experiment, and they then contacted every person we re-identified to prove that it was accurate. But they didn't publish anything without the person's permission, so that was sort of ideal. But Jordan and them also did something else. They let us use their team of attorneys who were experts in Freedom of Information Act requests and Public Records Acts. And so every state that had the discharge data, we issued a public records request, and the lawyers stayed on it. And so we got back. It's on the datamap.org if you look at buyers.
Okay.
And what was so surprising, what we kind of expected was we expected Holy Grail researchers. We expected John Hopkins and so forth to be the top multi-state acquirers of this data. But the actual top multi-state acquirers often were data analytic companies, sort of the data's version of data brokers, right? And when you then look at so IMS Health would be an example of that. So then if you look at what are their products often seem like they link the data to other data to produce another data product. And how much money is in there? Well, billions and billions of dollars. And so that's another problem with the expert determination. Most of the expert determination, when you look on the data map, has a financial cost. Somebody paid money for that expert determination. And in order to pay, $20,000, $30,000 for an expert determination, the data has to be worth a lot to you.
And who comprise the ultimate markets?
Data analytic companies, IMS Health
But
is
they
a
sell
big one.
to somebody.
Oh yeah, then so I'll do an anatomy of IMS Health. So they have prescription data. They take the prescription data. They also get hospital discharge data and so forth. I'm not going to say they link because I don't have any direct notion of that. But they then produce data market products that they sell to pharmaceutical companies. So if you're a pharmaceutical company and at a high level, you just might want to know how well your drugs are doing. What's the uptake? At a detailed level, we know from the Sorrell case, at a detailed level, you want to know which doctor could be prescribing your drug and isn't. And that's the one you send your sales rep to.
You know, you don't need to buy your data from rogues to do that.
Well, I was giving one example. I mean, there are also examples of how effective is a pharmaceutical advertising campaign, and that's a crossing of prescription or hospital discharge data with cable, what you're watching from the cable company, and linking that. And so each of these companies, there are many, many of them, have specialties.
Wait, but you're asking who's stealing the data?
Now, I'm assuming the data has been wrongly obtained in one way or another.
Well, none of this is illegal.
Well, that would be organized crime and others who are engaged in fraud.
And then who is buying?
But wait a second, that assumes that all of the data that we've talked about today is nothing about that is illegal.
I understand that.
Oh, okay.
So then who are the rogues that you're talking about?
I don't know. But there is an active industry.
Yes, and there are many people who monetize the data, and the more monetization of this data and exploitation of the data, the harder it is to get it to change. I think his hand was up first.
Latanya, first off, pleasure to meet you. I was going to come up to you afterwards, but it's just fitting right in here. Your colleague, Jim Waldo, has written a couple of papers about a year apart. The first one was, oh my God, we can't share data because when we do, and it's supportive of a lot of the stuff that I think you can cite you in it, the fact it could be re-identified. And then about a year later, he came back with a hypothesis that perhaps a combination of suppression and generalization might give an optimal approach. We actually met with him and showed him a demo of technology we developed, ironically for the GDPR, that uses his approach. And so he was the one who said, if you can ever grab her anywhere, seriously, find out if Latanya and or any of her students would be willing to use your technology. It doesn't eradicate the risks of identification, but what's fascinating is, does the ability to suppress and generalize data and then enforce it with keys give you a technologically enforced data use agreement and enclave model? And so I would love to be able to catch some time, because I would love for you to kick the tires and see if in fact improves upon this. Because some of the stuff you're talking about, the requirement for duration and improvement and testing, that has to be done technologically as opposed to setting out a prescription and expecting it to last for a while. And so the reason I'm raising this as opposed to a private conversation is because it's, although we didn't know the research that Professor Walden was doing, in case you've never met him, he's an amazing guy. He's CTO of a couple of different schools.
Harvard, yes.
He's your biggest fan, and he said, if you want to test my hypothesis...
We co-teach a class. Well, he teaches it now, but...
So I will try to catch more time with you, but the point for the group is that perhaps the approach is a technologically enforced approach that gives you the benefits of most of these different models with less of the downside. Nothing's going to be an absolute, but we're trying to balance interests.
Yeah, well, so we look forward to learning more, and so maybe part of our yearly report when we come back to this conference next year is kind of to include that. That would be cool.
We'd love that.
I think she was...
I just wanted to ask you on the previous example that you were giving about data brokers taking the information, selling to pharma, and different examples. Do you know of any examples where they sell to insurance companies or something where it's beyond just the pharma learning about itself, so to speak?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what has been a real eye-opening experiences have been the breach notices. Because the breach notices is like, wait, where did you get that data? You know, so there are a lot of inferences about who's sharing what data that comes out of these breach notices. So wellness data is a really interesting space for that kind of investigation, because how much of the data goes back, how much information goes back to the employer, right? Many years ago, Leno's did a study. He's from the University of Chicago, and he surveyed Fortune 500 companies, and about a third of them admitted to making hiring, firing, and promotion decisions based on health data. But that's totally illegal. That is illegal. And the fact that they admitted to it is pretty stunning. And so wellness data really, it just has that opportunity for.
There was a panel yesterday on wellness, basically like, wellness is really bad for you. Because
It's called badness.
Right.
Mark Rothstein also did a presentation on compelled disclosures.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did research over the past year to
Yeah.
update. So
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 million.
Thank you. I think she was up, and then let's get somebody over here.
Are you familiar with or with patients being involved in designing their data use agreements, as I think has been perhaps explored by Picori with some of what they're doing? Or?
Yeah, well, good luck with that. So, I mean, that also gets us right back again to, oh my goodness, can we fundamentally change HIPAA? So HIPAA has a fiction, right? It used to be a more explicit fiction in the version of HIPAA that was under the Clinton administration, and then the version we have now, which was actually promulgated under the Bush administration. But one of the things that's interesting about what happened with this consent is in both of them, it's not real. So you go to the doctor's office, you sign the consent form, and they may even have a box that says it's okay to use my data for research. And you absolutely say no, or you make sure you don't, or you circle it, and you take a picture of it. Whatever you're gonna, you post it on your Facebook page. They're not doing my data. It has nothing to do, no data sharing decision is based on whether you check that box or not. No one ever is gonna look at that box to know. So I don't understand. You can create a data use agreement that the individual could have control, but unless it's something like through my data can, where the individual actually has control of the data, or unless it's just nothing more than a research participation agreement, that I want to give my DNA data to him for his own outside research, and he's going to collect it separately, then it's not binding. That doesn't mean that's not important work to do. Because suppose we come back and we do have my data can is very popular, or some other instantiation, or even what I think his model might look like. Then all of a sudden you do have some ways to enforce such an agreement. Right now we don't have such a way. We don't have either the notion of control or ownership of data to do that, and in fact we have at least one regulation that covers a lot of health data that actually would totally ignore it.
So surely the answer then is to move the battle space. Stop fighting that battle over there, move the battle space. So I'll talk about it at lunchtime, but if the individual owns their data, not a third party doing it, but if you on your own device own your data, which you do with our stuff, others will do the same, and therefore you can get that true longitudinal record, but also cover stuff that they can't get anywhere else, socioeconomic, genomic, etc. Then the companies that really want your data will come direct to you because the quality is there, and it's also much cheaper. That will then remove the money from the battle space you're worried about, and it will implode upon itself. So the key is to move it, because it solves a lot of your problems. Why worry about HIEs trying to work out whether I'm Julian? Just come to me and I give my data to the new doctor or whatever else. So you just move the battle space. It solves a lot of problems.
Well, it does solve a lot of problems, and this idea of giving individuals sort of control or a health vault or whatever, it's been around for a really long time, and it's come up in many different instantiations.
But not implemented so that they always come up against HIPAA, because when you say give the data to an individual, what people mean is I, the company, will hold the health vault on your behalf, but it's your data. Right?
Hey, let me
That's
tell
not
you something.
giving the
Let me
data
tell
to
you
the
something.
individual, is it?
I fought many hours for that privilege. I just want you to know
No.
that was never even on the table. A hospital wasn't even going to give you a copy of your data.
Let me take you
I'm just saying.
No, that's brilliant.
I'm
trying to take you further.
I understand.
What I'm saying is, that always isn't moving the battle space. It's gone a long way. Moving the battle space is when the individual owns it themselves. No third-party company is touching, seeing, or holding the data.
Okay,
Right?
so
That's taking it the extra space.
we're,
Now you don't have a
we're
hidden
drinking the same Kool-Aid.
Right.
Right? I mean, my data can is drinking exactly the same Kool-Aid, and others have come. Eventually, it's definitely the right thing.
Why eventually? Why not now? It's happening now.
Yeah, well, we want to be able to say, at least our part of it and your part of it, we want to come back next year and have let's give ourselves high fives and we got it working. So, but I want to tell you.
Well, let me answer his question.
Do you mean
Because
own
it's
or do you
ba-
mean control?
But
Because
what-
ownership is a completely different
Yeah.
issue.
Well, own is, in a digital world, this is always the fascinating thing. And you can, I'm sure the lawyers here will have a great fun with it, but we've played with this across all sorts of data categories. Ownership in a digital sense can be multiple. Multiple people can own the same data. So it's perfectly okay for the GP or the medical section to own their piece of the medical interaction with you. And you own a copy of it. You both own in that sense.
That's not the legal sense.
So yeah, so wait a second.
It doesn't matter, as long as you
might want to think
Wait
about
one
ownership
second.
versus stewardship.
Hold on.
Guys, wait one second. Like I said, this has been around a long time. So let me give you the language that gets everybody synced up again. He doesn't mean ownership. What he means is that the individual has a copy that they have control of.
Yep.
That's independent of a copy that others may have for their own fiduciary and liability
And that's what your
requirements.
system thinks about too.
And that's what my system is saying. His system is saying. Bill is not here. His system is saying. And the reason that way of saying it stops that conversation.
Well, it does, but it doesn't, because from an individual's perspective, and I think you've got to think of the individual here, when they have a copy, I don't care what you want to call it locally, they own that copy there. They are able to reuse it, right, in any way they want. They can give it to any third party. If that isn't ownership in a real sense of the word own, I don't know what ownership means. Now, if you want to say that there's a different word legally,
Okay.
ownership means
Okay,
I've got
so
it, I
so
can
that they don't
reuse
start
it.
yelling again, let me explain. Let me tell you how I came to appreciate the way I said it. So I had a front row seat to the HIPAA debates. And one of the questions that was, so on this particular day, the testimony was all about who should own the medical data. So the first group that gets up was the American Hospital Association, and they articulated why the hospital had to own the data, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. They have to keep records. They need to know whether or not the information was accurate and so forth. The next group that got up was a patient group, I forget which group it was, and they said why the patient should own it. It's their data, it's all about them, therefore they should own it. The next group that got up was the American Medical Association. They argued how it was the intellectual property of the doctor. You little dribbling patient came in all sick and stuff, throwing germs everywhere. They ran some tests, but it was the intellectual property of the doctor that realized exactly what was wrong with you. And that the most important part was that he took these facts and he put together this plan of care and his notes. And that's his own intellectual property. So, Bob Gelman and others took the current writing of HIPAA, tore it up, because the idea of ownership was not going to happen. And so HIPAA does not talk about ownership. It just talks about rights and responsibilities.
Okay, so that's great, and I will agree with you, right? But when you go and talk to an individual, which will be important, because they're going to be the people at the centre of this, right? We can use the word own, whether we mean it legally or not.
Well,
because
all you got to do is say they own their copy.
Correct.
And their copy is more complete and can be more accurate.
Okay, so I'll agree with that.
Okay, all right, we're going to stop for a second and let some other people talk. I think she's been trying to talk for a while.
I have an observation and a question. Is there any advocacy going on over the low-hanging fruit? Like, I loved your students yesterday talking about the state laws that are not in compliance with HIPAA. Is anybody trying to get the HHS or the states to stop disclosing the kinds of details that you've uncovered?
Well, the students are. They've taken this on.
They were mentioning that they didn't want to be too forceful in advocating for violations of HIPAA. So is anybody trying to push HHS or push the states to change their policies for disclosure?
I see. So first of all, there's a little bit of confusion there. Our conversation has been about HIPAA, but HIPAA actually has no control over those state data sets. Those state data sets are by state law, and HIPAA doesn't preempt state law. So the states are not obligated to be HIPAA compliant, but what we observe is that the states are choosing standards that are weaker than HIPAA.
So somebody should be raising a huge fuss about this.
We're trying. We're trying.
Doesn't this sound like that?
The other observation, I work for the bankruptcy courts as a
Yeah.
consumer privacy ombudsman. And the way the notice and choice model of the bankruptcy privacy policies work is that the states or the companies are now defining privacy policies in a way to authorize the wholesale transfer of all sorts of data without any oversight by the courts or the ombudsman, and that includes biometrics, genomics, wellness data. So is anybody working on that issue, because that's a huge problem?
This is such an important point. People may not really appreciate what you just said, so I just want to level set everyone. So what happens when one of these data brokers or trusted insurance companies or whatever goes bankrupt? Their data is an asset of the company, and in bankruptcy, the data gets sold or could be purchased and so forth. And so this is what this is a very important point.
Well, I just wrote a Law Review article about this, so I dug into it in some detail, and there's statistics from the New York Times and other places that almost all the companies now have changed their privacy policies so that they can sell to the highest bidder, and that can be criminals. I had convicted felons buying data in my cases.
Wow.
Which article?
Yeah, can you tell us more about the article or some pointers there?
Well,
We may have to set up a website to put links.
In 2 months.
Is it SSRN? Sorry,
This is going to be in the Norton Bankruptcy Journal.
So maybe we could, if you send me a copy, I will post it if you don't mind.
Really good. But I was kind of, I hadn't paid too much attention other than the fact that I've had some cases where the bankruptcy courts allowed anybody to buy the data. And I've worked with the state attorneys general, and we caught this felon like 15 minutes before the sale was approved. He was convicted of tax fraud, and it was a very disturbing situation. So now foreign governments can buy the data, criminals of any kind, and the companies are just saying, oh, this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. All right, let's get some other points in
I
here.
just have a very quick question.
Well, I'm
Private
right.
and securing your data, your prescription data when you go to pharmacies like Target or CVS.
How?
When you go and you use your prescription by your doctor, and they ask you all these questions, you just want your meds, you just want to get well.
Right.
Then after that, you are left like, who knows who gets my information? I mean, this is Target, this is CVS,
Right.
these are major companies.
Right.
What happened to your data?
So.
Did they sell it, share it, steal it? What happened?
So HIPAA, this is like a lecture on HIPAA. Like, how many ways is HIPAA broken? And we've only scratched the surface. But so I'm going to go back to 1996 and 1997 again, when the way the HIPAA, this will answer your question. This will give the background to answer your question. So what happened was, at first, they wanted to write a European Union-like law. They wanted to say, this is what medical privacy data, this is medical data, and if you have this kind of data, you're subject to this rule. That's what they wanted to say. And the Supreme Court, through OMB, sent a letter to OMB saying that they were concerned about sort of about power being seized by the executive branch. Because the way HIPAA came to be was originally, it was all about just trying to reduce costs in healthcare by standardizing things. So back then, if you had insurance company X, they had forms that went like this, and when in each field was specific, they had their own forms, their own filing cabinets. And the idea was that hospital got so locked down that the overhead to change to another insurance company was huge. And so the real goal for the HIPAA, the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act, was to standardize. Say everybody's going to use this UB92 form. You're going to diagnosis codes are going to use these ICD-9 codes, and so the printout, if you were to actually print the actual HIPAA bill, if you print out 8.5 by 11, double-sided, would be about this high off the